God, who would have known the craziness of the video game industry of 2025 has already begun and it's not even the end of the first month. Rockstar are now considering to make GTA 6 $100 or even $80 cheapest. I don't have to ask why, let alone should think about this. A game for that price should never happen. This conversation should never come to the surface.
Do you think we're wealthy?
But why has this conversation came back up again? Well, let's find out. Hi, I'm Mux15 and let's dive into this stupidity. In an IGN article, there is hope among some within the video game industry that Grand Theft Auto 6 will be priced between $80 and $100, one analyst has said. In a wide-ranging presentation on the state of gaming in 2025, Apelion CEO Matthew Ball said Rockstar's guaranteed mega hit could re-establish packed video game prices after decades of deflation, despite rampant cost growth. GTA 6, due out fall 2025 on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S, is the long-awaited follow-up to 2013's record-breaking GTA 5. Analysts have projected it will make an eye-watering $3 billion first year on sale, with $1 billion in pre-orders before it even launches. It seems likely that GTA 6 will be the biggest entertainment launch in history, with revenue ahead of any film. But how much would GTA 6 cost the gamer? Most AAA video games cost $70 as standard after a $10 price hike that kicked in with the current generation of consoles in 2020. Could Rockstar and its parent company Take-Two use GTA 6 as an opportunity to go higher 5 years later? In his report, Ball reported that some game makers hope GTA 6 will be priced at $80 to $100, breaking the $70 barrier and helping $50 titles to move up to $60 to do $70, $70 to $80, etc. While this price hike would certainly raise eyebrows with the video game audience, Ball argued that a $70 GTA 6 would be the cheapest GTA game ever released. In real terms, that is. When taking inflation into account, in real terms, $91 would be the average, Ball said. Packaged game prices have never been lower in real terms than they are today, even though budgets are at all-time highs and player growth is stalled. Ball said in the report, GTA 6 could re-establish packaged video game prices after decades of deflation despite rampant cost growth. Ball's report has sparked a discussion about the value of video games and the likelihood that Rockstar would actually go through with an $80 to $100 price range for GTA 6. Reacting to Ball's comment, Michael Dose, publishing director of Baldur's Gate 3, developer Larian, tweeted, "You're not supposed to say this out loud." He continued, "A good company raises salaries in line with inflation so that their staff don't die or something. But game prices haven't risen in inflation. This isn't the reason the industry is in this shit for now, but it is an uncomfortable truth. On the other hand, the responsibility for a game developer is to make sure that the game they show lives up to the promise and that investment from the player." The way that Ball is trying to justify that a game price should go up due to inflation shows how out of touch he really is. And Rockstar considering the $100 price hike just shows how entitled they think they are. Yeah, GTA is a very popular title, but it doesn't mean you can raise the price and expect gamers to buy it. It's bad enough as it is, but as the cost of living is going up. What Larian said is absolutely spot on. It's the video game developer's responsibility to make sure what they make lives up to the promise and is an investment to the player. Basic marketing 101. But what did Larian mean by his "this isn't the reason the industry is in the shit for now"? Well, let's give some examples of absolute insane budgets on game development of certain video game companies. Ubisoft reported they spent $650 to $850 million on Skull and Bones. Remember, this game was supposed to be cancelled as many developers, well, should I say now ex-developers of Ubisoft, voiced their concerns and spoke the truth. only to be told that they should keep their mouths shut or they'll be out of the company in a second. But these ex-developers warned execs and the guys in suits that this game was going to fail and nobody wanted it. But why didn't they heed the warning? Oh right, because they received a grant to aid by the Singapore government that in order to have a studio there, they had to create the game regardless.
Why?
So why didn't Ubisoft pull the plug regardless? Well, it was too late. Pulling the plug on a game's development is a huge financial burden on the company, and with no other options, they had to concede and ask the Singapore government to bail them out of their own forewarned failure. EA invested $200 to $250 million on a kid-alt Dora the Explorer struggle session, which of course is Dragon Age the Fail Guard. And then you had video game journos rushing to the aid of the delusional developers when players absolutely roasted them for destroying a franchise many loved, and justifiably so. Then seeing people like Korean Bush running away like cowards, showing they don't have the mental capacity, let alone have those high positions in the first place, leaving BioWare in quicksand and ready to give way at any moment. And let's not forget Rocksteady with Sushi Squad. That costed Warner Brothers $200 million to make, only to not have a prayer in the world to make the money back, because apparently the incantation that DEI was their strength and allowing Sweet Baby Inc. to get involved was the final nail in the coffin.
Our goal overall is to tell better stories. We also want to make them more innovative, more inclusive as kind of part of that. We do everything from kind of script writing to narrative direction to sensitivity and representational and inclusive reading.
But even a trailer showing you the team behind it, that these were not serious people. These diverse video game developers did not know how to code, as when early access came out, the game was incomplete. It kept crashing the moment you tried to go online. I don't know why they didn't have single player mode on there, but that microtransaction store worked, as they say. And now Rocksteady paid a price with mass layoffs. With so much damage that has been done for the past 12 years, layoffs, studios shutting down, veterans and absolute talent being fired for their views and not being obedient little toy soldiers, is it no surprise we are where we are today because of the narcissism that's been manufactured thanks to modern video game developers demanding comfort than to face their own problems, and greedy men in suits who think they can just milk us dry for every last cent? And now they have the nerve to think we can just bump up the price of video games because of their own incompetence and failures should be compensated by the customer and not themselves.
You greedy dirtbag!
I mean, this is not the first time this conversation has happened, and unfortunately this certainly will not be the last, the way things are going. In an article back in 2023, Capcom president Haruhiro Sugimoto went on record stressing that game prices are too low and development costs are about 100 times higher than the Famicom era. Although Slanik and Sugimoto missed out on one fact, that games have evolved over the years to be rammed with endless microtransactions. Until recently, exact figures of how much a AAA game costs to develop were predictions, but the recent Insomniac games leaked revealed just how much games cost. Marvel's Spider-Man cost $350 million to develop, while Marvel's Wolverine, which is now scheduled to release in 2026, will cost an estimated $305 million. In comparison, one of the biggest games of all time, GTA 5, was released in 2013 with an approximate cost of $265 to develop, including marketing costs. Such high numbers are mainly attributed to development time, where development teams of a few hundred can no longer develop a AAA game in a matter of a couple of years. 5 to 6 years are now on the low end of the norm, with some games taking closer to a decade. Next, let's take a look at the topic of inflation, as consumers were seeing prices increase drastically these couple of years. The first video games that were released for the Atari 2600 in 1997 will set you back $39.99, but now, 46 years later, the same game would have costed a staggering $202.62 according to this inflation calculator. Using the same inflation calculator and my computer skills from high school, let's take a look at how much games should cost if they follow inflation. Remember, in 2023, current generation console games, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, costed $69.99. In terms of the PlayStation console, which saw its first console release, PlayStation 1, with games priced at $49.99, we can see that over the years released on the platform have never matched inflation. If they did, we would now be seeing games priced at the $100 price point already. Well, when we look at the graphs, this should tell you everything. Yeah, that is a real big difference, and it just literally bulldozes Michael Bull's predictions. So to summarize, all of this inflation is not the reason. It's what's known as skinflation, with an added bonus of price hiking. Because of the ridiculous blockbuster budgets being used and have been absolutely mishandled, because only a third of the budget should be used to make the game and the rest of it for marketing. Even at times, you can save more money if the marketing budget wasn't as big as you needed it to be, because of the stupid sustainability filled to the brim with microtransactions thanks to many suits getting too greedy. So really, don't these charts or graphs just tell you why things are failing? Really, you don't need charts or graphs to tell you why things are failing. You can literally see it from space if you're kept up. But why the hell did investors and stockholders fund these companies that were doomed to fail in the first place? Well, let's take a look at Matthew Bull's presentation, The State of Video Gaming in 2023. This is a 223-page presentation, and I'm only going to go through the important and shocking bits. In page 6, this is where my eyebrows raised. They thought the pandemic or even COVID was the future for gaming. Yes, these idiots thought more people will be buying more video games since they were stuck indoors, not taking into consideration that many people will be losing their jobs and will be very smart with saving their money in case something was to happen to them financially. Let alone having food on the table, heat in your home and a roof over your head was far more important than spending it on recreation. ARK Investments was so confident on the betting table that they thought it will be making more than 50% in 4 years. I mean, not even a bookie would bet that high unless they knew the game was rigged. In page 13, the amount of funding being spent from video game companies is unreal. From 2021 to 2022, they made it look like money was nothing more than pigeon feed to them. But as we know, in current day, the consequences of reckless investing and spending is real, because once the pandemic was over, the financial consequences hit hard on the entire world, with mass inflation, and people were no longer stuck in their homes and had to go back to the workplace. Not as much free time as they once had. I can't believe these so-called investors and video game executives forgot the amount of stimulus checks and welfare that was given to poor and middle class families was like putting a child in charge of a sweet shop, which caused catastrophic consequences on the economy, because someone has to pay for the damages, someone has to pay for all the candy that had been eaten because of the new manager's lack of self-control and overindulgence. In page 11, when I saw these game titles, I don't need to know why they flopped. Passionate gamers knew why they flopped. But in the presentation, Matthew said it flopped because of the shortfall of players, dollars and hours played led to its demise. And that's where I say, no you simpleton. They flopped because they were utter crap. They were shit, they were bland, they were corporate generic, and nobody wanted them. Oh, and let's not forget some of them were worked on by Sweet Baby Inc. and delusional activists that posed as video game developers and narrative writers that forced their ideologies just to make themselves feel seen and important. In page 9, when we look at the video game content real spend, in 2006, gaming was getting more accessible and was starting to become even more mainstream thanks to the release of the Nintendo Wii that attracted a lot of customers who weren't even gamers. As to them, it was a convenience to have. I mean, old grandparents bought it for the sake of bringing families together or just to shut their grandchildren up. Of course, When there's a sonic booming success, there's going to be a ripple effect across the future years until 2024 we start to see a decline. But why? Oh right, I forgot, the pandemic struck, or so I thought. Because really it shouldn't be that low, until I realised there is a massive growth in social media, online video game communities, and video game industry discussions and discords as a whole, and it's still growing. But why? Well, since gamers' feedback and opinions have been left in the dark for so long, there has never been a stronger voice to be heard that cannot be ignored. Of course, video game journalists try to silence us, and video game companies implementing customer harassment policies to censor gamers, but all it did was a Streisand effect, and it made it even louder. People are now a lot more conservative of what games they want to spend and which gaming companies they want to support. More video gamers are becoming YouTubers. More people are engaged into conversations more than ever. They can choose to ignore it, but they know deep within their souls the gamers are in control of the video game company's fate, and they have all the power. Not them. No one can tell me that video gamers once said to themselves, and probably to video game developers straight to their faces, and said, you know what, I'm tired. I want my video games, let alone my hobbies, to be great again, just like in the glory days. I want to voice my opinions without being cancelled, or to be told by video game developers and shills to keep my mouth shut that I know nothing. But unfortunately these people became total SOBs, and they created this problem and have been betrayed too many times. And one day maybe they start listening, but I ain't gonna waste my time or investment on them no more. Nor will I tolerate this. Eventually, the normies will start to say that. And if they have said it up until now, they said it because the video game companies made it difficult by not listening to them, as it was far more important to bend the knee and to be in their safety bubble of comfort that is going to burst at any time. I want to show some examples of video game developers in the past that were innovators, creative, intelligent, and they didn't run away from their problems, let alone for burning more money was the way forward in order to make legendary titles. Take Satoru Iwata, God bless his soul, the saviour of Nintendo and its other game branches. This is a guy who saved Game Freak from the quaking pressure of making Pokemon Gold and Silver before release day. After the huge success of Pokemon Red and Green, Game Freak were no longer a bunch of nobodies. The moment Pokemon became a worldwide cultural phenomenon and then tasked into making the next game, they were panicking and running around like headless chickens with so little resources and only 4 programmers and no translators at all. Oh, and of course, they were told to create Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Yellow with better graphics, next to no bugs and a smoother gameplay in between. But the biggest kicker was creating Pokemon Stadium 64 as well. With so much on their plate, it looked impossible to make the second generation Pokemon game, as well as Pokemon Stadium 64 in between. And to make matters worse, the game's coding was an absolute clusterfudge, with over 5 years of work all over the place and not being organised or documented into one system. So if you wasn't one of those 4 programmers at the time and you looked at the coding, you wouldn't have a clue how to program it, let alone read it. Game Freak were trapped in their own magnum opus until one man showed up. He was the grand programming problem solver, and he said,
"Challenge accepted."
Yep, it was none other than Satoru Iwata. At the time, Iwata was not an employee of Nintendo nor Game Freak, but the president of a company called HAL Laboratory. So he had a chair in meetings and oversaw how other companies were doing under Nintendo. He didn't start out as a president. Nope, he started out at the lowest as a hotshot programmer coding a number of key games within the company. Upon seeing that Game Freak was in quicksand and needed a helping hand, He offered himself to help in deciphering Game Freak's code and take care of the localization. No, he wasn't volunteering his own company or to do some free PRing. He wanted to challenge himself and develop his own skills while figuring out of how Pokemon Red and Pokemon Green fit together. A lot was skeptical if Iwata can even fix a conundrum like this if 4 other programmers couldn't do it. But after reading the code and making his own notes, he proved them wrong. When a representative came to check on his progress, still in doubt if Iwata can do both the coding and the localizing at the same time, he showed his work, documentation skills, and how he made it even easier to code the game, to the point if someone new came along, they had everything at the ready to get started with the project. But it didn't stop there. He also helped in making the red and green battle mechanics be implemented into Pokemon Stadium 64. For Game Freak, it was a big problem, as their coding barely fit together, let alone ran smoothly on the gaming hardware. But Iwata completed the entire process in 1 week. Nintendo and Game Freak were astounded by the progress that one man managed to fix 2 of Game Freak's biggest problems in a short space of time. Don't get me wrong, Game Freak did get a little too comfortable by giving more work to Iwata. Also, Iwata even made them an image compression system that saved absolute loads of data on the gaming cartridge, which a lot of video game companies back in the day had that kind of problem as well when they tried to code their own games. When Pokemon Gold and Silver was released, it lived up to the creators' expectations. New gameplay elements, more detailed sprites and colour graphics, a map twice the size as the original thanks to adding the Kanto region. Iwata was not the person to run away from problems, nor to say we need more money and resources. He was someone who looked at problems in a way, treated it as if he was playing a video game himself. By solving problems meant more experience points and better equipped for the next task at hand. When it came to programming other games, this was a guy who yearned for driving passion and giving gamers and companies what they needed to make art and success for all to enjoy, not for greed or ego. For a Western developer, think of David Brevik. When in 1997, he was called by Blizzard North to create Diablo 1, an action RPG, where mouse clicking on certain areas, NPCs or enemies was never so simple and addicting. But I want to touch on how Blizzard North made the game accessible to everyone, and no, I'm not talking about the PS1 version, but for the PC back in 1997. All you needed was a keyboard, mouse, a CD-ROM drive installed, and a Pentium processor that ran at 60 MHz. These babies were very accessible at the time, as they were made back in 1993, so a lot of PCs would have had this already. But last but no means least, have the Direct 3.0 API installed, as that would allow the PC to render 2D or 3D graphics. There was even a mom test that the crew implemented, which meant could your mom even install this game, let alone play it, so they weren't beaten over the head with a telephone book trying to call Blizzard HQ for an installation manual. Just turn on your computer, put the game disc in the CD-ROM tray, and away you go. But how did a simple game become an addictive global phenomenon and a cornerstone for action RPGs? Well, as we know, there are a few things David Brevik and his team wanted to implement: RNG dungeons, random loot, and permadeath. Though permadeath was later dropped and only RNG dungeons and random loot stayed within the design. With these 2 ingredients and later some classic artwork and lore within the game's manual, gotta miss those. Diablo 1 is still a classic, played to this day and even speedrunned, but keeping things simple did have its problems.
Out the atmosphere. So what went wrong in the graphics? And this one still gives me, I don't even know why we didn't change this, even when we knew that it was a big problem. So what went wrong were the floors, or I guess the walls, or I guess both. All right, so looking at this picture, you can see that how we drew the scene. And so the way that we would draw the scene is we would start it there at tile number 1, you can imagine, and then tile 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6, and then so you kind of like went from the back, what was away from you, and kind of moved forward left to right and drew these tiles. And when you drew the tile, I drew the tile, and then I drew all the stuff that was on top of the tile right there. And so it's like, oh, it's got a player there, and it's got an item, and you know, it has a chest or whatever, and so it would draw whatever is on top of the tile. So that worked really well until we actually attached the walls to the floor. And so when I went to go draw something and you were moving from one square to the other, your sprite would get cut off. You would be like halfway through your walk as you moved along, because you're here in this location in the kind of the 1 position, and as you moved to 2, it would draw 2 after it would draw 1, and so your sprite would just end up getting cut off. And so we had to fix this by actually moving you to the place that you're gonna be down screen, and then kind of negatively offsetting you back to where you were, and then slowly drawing you the other way. So in Diablo, and then we had to program all sorts of AI stuff where it was like targeting the right place of where you were or going to be and all this kind of stuff. And all we had to do was just separate the damn floor from the walls. I don't know why we didn't go back and do that. If we had just drawn all the floor and then drawn the walls, then and all the things on top of it, it would have solved a lot of these problems. We're terrible businessmen. So we're so excited about actually making Diablo that we signed the contract without realizing that we just agreed to do Diablo for $300,000. We have 15 people in the studio. How, what? We have to pay them 20 grand a piece for the next year to get this done. And not only that, but that's like with the office space and everything or whatever. We got to pay them $12,000 a month, a year or whatever. $1,000 a month to come work on Diablo. How exciting. Wow, that was dumb. But we're making Diablo. and so then, well, what are we going to do about this? Well, shit, we got to get more work. All right, well, we got to do more contract work. And so we knew some people over at 3DO, and 3DO is making a new machine called the M2. And so they said, okay, well, yeah, we would love for you to do some cutting edge development. And so we signed an agreement to do a football game called NFLPA Superstars, which kind of backyard football, like a 6-on-6 football with just the stars of the NFL league. And we said, awesome. And we signed the contract for almost $1 million, which was huge at the time. And that helped a lot. Now, everybody won in the end here because the M2 hardware was never really launched. And after we were bought by Blizzard, spoiler alert, the M2 technology was sold to Matsushita for $100 million. So that really kind of launched 3DO as a publisher, and they used that money. And then Blizzard said, well, you know, we're not really going to budge. And 3DO was actually offering us twice as much money. And we turned them down. Really because we felt that Blizzard really got us and got the game, and we were so close in company culture and beliefs that we turned down twice as much money to be bought and become Blizzard. So little something there, which doesn't make us the best businessmen, but another example of my worst business decision of my career. Mid-96, Max has a friend. It's not just Max's friend, but Max knew him first. His name's Sabir. And he came to us with an idea. And he said, I got this idea. I am going to make email over the internet. I said, dude, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. What are you talking about? I already have my email over the internet. This isn't even an invention. This is nothing. And he said, no, it's going to be huge. It's a big idea. It's a really, no. And he's like, look, I'll give you 10% of the company if I can take one office in the back. Just, you know, you guys aren't even using that room. I'm like, look, it's crunch time. We only have a few months left in the project here. We're trying to ship by December. This is late summer at this point. It's like, oh my God, I don't need the stress. I don't need the distraction of him doing it. Plus, this is the stupidest idea ever. Email on the internet. It doesn't even make sense. I already have email on the internet. Yeah, that company was Hotmail. Which 14 months later sold for $400 million, of which 10% could have been mine, which is now worth $280 million.
If David took the contract, his payroll troubles would have been over and never needed Blizzard in the first place. After all that is said and done, Diablo sold 2.5 million copies on PC, making it a huge success that is still talked about to this day. You see where I'm going with this? Back in the day, video game developers were problem solvers, they were innovators, and that is how creativity is born. Yeah, they weren't perfect, but they weren't being crybabies or run away from conflict or problems, or even worse, blame their own failures on customers that give honest feedback, which apparently now is hate speech and harassment in current modern day. They always found solutions no matter what. Plus back then, they didn't have money to burn to get more resources. They had to use what they can work with, and if they wanted something so bad, they had to make an effort to the point it only costed them their time and oxygen, not their budget. And what's even more ironic, back in the day, developers who were executives or even CEOs were actually video game developers themselves, and they knew their craft. Whereas the execs and CEOs right now are either greedy sleazebags or incompetent busybodies that know nothing about the industry. Yeah, I'm talking about you, Reishi Sika, Vice President of Ubisoft DEI programs. But let's not forget CEO of Xbox, Phil Spencer, that literally killed the Xbox brand. And who could not forget this clip back in 2024 at the Bloomberg Live with current Xbox President, Sarah Bond.
To some of the trends you're identifying, earlier this week, Xbox announced the shuttering of 4 game studios. I know you're not the studio's chief, but how should gamers understand that move in terms of Microsoft's commitment to developing innovative exclusive games?
Yeah, it's always extraordinarily hard when you have to make decisions like that. I'll go back to what I was saying about the industry, and when we looked at those fundamental trends, we feel a deep responsibility to ensure that the games we make, the devices we build, the services that we offer are there through moments, even when the industry isn't growing and when you're through a time of transition. And the news we announced earlier this week is an outcome of that. And our commitment to make sure that the business is healthy for the long term.
She's shit.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
She's a box ticker, Hugh. She can't think outside the box.
No, in fact, she's built a box inside the actual box, and she's doing her thinking inside that box.
And you wonder why I hate DEI over passion. Because it's people like Sarah Bond who got those positions because in order to keep the so-called minorities in line, they had to make them think that they're still important. Sarah is happy to play the role of a sock puppet, president, by giving up her dignity so she won't be a threat to the company and other minorities. I mean, the same can be said for the LGBT, as I covered in my previous videos. Hence why the mentorship programs exist for that sole reason, not to create creative and passionate innovators that are well equipped to solve problems and create the next smash hit game, only to create obedient, soulless workers that will always want the easy way out and want to remain at a company forever, which they themselves are too upside their own a-holes to see. But the more video game companies get greedy, ignore or run away from conflict and would rather live in comfort, a video game crash is drawing ever closer and eventually become inevitable. Which in my opinion, with the way things are, I want it to happen. Now, call me crazy for being a video game enthusiast wanting my hobby to collapse. I want the normies and video game companies to finally wake up and no longer put up with this mess, let alone abuse in the first place. In conclusion, The reason why we get ever increasing massive blockbuster budgets that have been so mismanaged, and their video game companies having the nerve to make gaming into a luxury, is all because of this. They think that putting more money into projects generates even more money, and they're so narcissistic to the point we should be the ones compensating for their own failures. For fudge's sakes, that's not how money works, and this is not a winning strategy from the get-go. If they actually had talented video game developers and gave customers the art they deserve, they wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. They should be focusing on making games that actually work and what customers want, rather than wasting their time on attacking those who dare criticize them. But let's not forget, all the veterans and high talent either quit or got fired for their political views, or being too blunt to employees, you know, the ones that are dead weight and they only got the position to be tokenized. But it now seems veterans are making their own video game companies after seeing a massive need or opportunity for them to take advantage of, and I don't blame them. So, is it any surprise more and more gamers are becoming social media influencers themselves, or watching the very ones expressing their opinions that are showing gamers back in the glory days how good we got it, rather than playing the modern slop we have today? Plus, doing this is then new entertainment within itself, and it doesn't cost them an arm or a leg. And believe me, I'm one of them as well. But the more these companies think like this, the faster their demise will come, and there's no hiding or any way to run for comfort once it does. And at the end of the day, they were the very ones that exacerbated the problem. All they had to do was just turn around and listen, and all of this would have all melted away. So that concludes this video. But what do you think? Do you think what I said was absolutely correct? Or do you think there's more to the story that I have left out? Or do you completely disagree? The choice is yours. This is Brooksy15, signing out.
Now, suddenly, this is all my fault. Why don't you walk me through this, Mike?
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a bitch. We had everything we needed. It all ran like clockwork.
Oh,
you could have
God.
shut your mouth and made as much money as you ever needed. It was perfect. But no, you just had to blow it up. You and your pride and your ego. You just had to be the man. If you'd done your job, known your place, we'd all be fine right now.